Most people believe toxic individuals are easy to spot: loud, aggressive, openly cruel. But what if the most dangerous ones are the calmest person in the room? The one who smiles at the right moments, listens carefully, and somehow leaves you feeling confused, smaller, or emotionally drained after every interaction. You don't walk away angry. You walk away doubting yourself. That feeling is not accidental. It is psychological design. Imagine a mind that studies human behavior the way a mechanic studies an engine, not to connect, but to control. A mind that understands emotions without truly experiencing them, that knows exactly which words disarm you, which silences destabilize you, and which gestures create dependence. This is not emotional immaturity. This is not poor communication. This is a specific psychological pattern that has been studied, documented, and repeatedly observed in clinical settings. The most unsettling part is this: toxic people don't see themselves as toxic. Inside their mind, harm is justified, manipulation is strategy, and people are either useful or irrelevant. Empathy is not absent. It is selectively switched off. Morality is not broken, it is flexible, and power, not connection, is the emotional currency they seek. If you have ever felt strangely pulled toward someone who later drained you, controlled you, or quietly undermined your sense of self, this is not weakness on your part. It is exposure to a personality structure that thrives on psychological access. Once you understand how this mind works, their behavior stops feeling personal and starts feeling predictable. Tonight, we are stepping inside that mind, not to sensationalize it, not to fear it, but to understand the hidden psychological architecture behind toxic behavior and why awareness alone is enough to break its influence. The Dark Tetrad refers to a cluster of 4 personality traits that, when present together, create a psychological profile marked by emotional coldness, manipulation, and a willingness to harm others for personal gain. These traits are narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and everyday sadism. Rather than appearing as obvious villains, individuals high in these traits often function smoothly in society, using charm, intelligence, or authority as cover. What makes the Dark Tetrad particularly dangerous is not intensity, but consistency. Harmful behavior is not impulsive or accidental, it is patterned and purposeful. Narcissism contributes an inflated yet fragile sense of self, requiring constant validation and superiority to feel stable. Machiavellianism adds strategic calculation, where relationships are viewed as systems to manipulate rather than bonds to honor. Psychopathy removes the emotional brakes, guilt, fear, and remorse, allowing harmful actions without internal resistance. Everyday sadism introduces pleasure in control, humiliation, or discomfort inflicted on others. Together, these traits create a mindset where people are reduced to tools, threats, or entertainment. Importantly, the Dark Tetrad exists on a spectrum. Many individuals may display mild traits without becoming abusive. However, when these characteristics cluster and repeat across relationships, they form a personality structure that thrives on power imbalance. Empathy becomes cognitive rather than emotional, morality becomes situational, and accountability feels unnecessary. Understanding this framework shifts the focus away from individual incidents and toward long-term behavioral patterns, which is essential for recognizing toxicity early and protecting psychological well-being. Toxic minds do not perceive people as emotional equals or autonomous individuals with inner worlds of their own. Instead, they view others through a functional lens, asking not who someone is, but what that person can provide, tolerate, or absorb. In this psychological framework, human beings are unconsciously categorized into roles such as resources, obstacles, threats, or sources of stimulation. Connection is not the goal, control, validation, or advantage is. This is why interactions with toxic individuals often feel transactional rather than mutual, even when they appear warm or attentive on the surface. Empathy, when present, is largely cognitive. Toxic individuals can accurately read emotional states, But this awareness is used strategically rather than compassionately. They know when someone feels insecure, guilty, or eager to please, and these emotional states become access points. Vulnerability is not respected, it is stored and later exploited. This distorted perception explains why personal disclosures often lead to subtle power shifts rather than deeper trust. Another defining feature is the absence of emotional reciprocity. While they expect understanding, patience, and forgiveness from others, they rarely feel obligated to offer the same. Accountability feels unnecessary because they do not internally experience relational responsibility. When someone sets boundaries, the toxic mind does not interpret it as self-respect, but as defiance or rejection. This often triggers manipulation, withdrawal, or retaliation. Understanding this perception is critical because it reveals that emotional exhaustion in these relationships is not caused by miscommunication, but by fundamentally incompatible psychological operating systems. Emotional deficits in toxic personalities are not always loud or obvious, they are often subtle, structural, and deeply ingrained. These individuals do not experience emotions with the same depth, continuity, or regulatory function as psychologically healthy people. Feelings such as guilt, remorse, and emotional accountability are either muted or absent. This does not mean they cannot describe emotions or recognize them in others, but rather that emotions do not guide their behavior in a meaningful way. Without this internal emotional feedback system, harmful actions do not trigger self-correction. Pain caused to others registers as information, not as distress. Moral blindness develops from this emotional gap. Ethics becomes situational rather than internalized. Right and wrong are evaluated based on outcomes, whether they gained power, avoided consequences, or maintained control, rather than on harm inflicted. This is why toxic individuals can justify betrayal, manipulation, or cruelty with remarkable ease. In their psychological framework, intention matters more than impact, and self-interest outweighs responsibility. Another consequence of emotional deficit is the inability to form genuine emotional bonds. Relationships may be intense, but they lack depth and mutual vulnerability. Affection is often conditional, withdrawn when it no longer serves a purpose. When confronted with the damage they cause, toxic individuals may intellectualize, deflect, or rationalize rather than reflect. This moral disengagement allows destructive patterns to repeat without internal conflict, creating cycles of harm that feel inexplicable to those expecting empathy, regret, or growth. Manipulation in toxic personalities is rarely chaotic or impulsive. It is structured, adaptive, and often invisible. Power and control are the psychological anchors around which their behavior organizes. Rather than seeking mutual influence, they aim to shape environments, conversations, and relationships in ways that preserve domina. This is achieved through subtle tactics such as selective honesty, emotional inconsistency, and strategic silence. By alternating warmth with withdrawal, they destabilize others' emotional equilibrium, creating confusion and dependency rather than trust. Control is often maintained through narrative management. Toxic individuals subtly redefine events, shift blame, or minimize harm, encouraging others to doubt their own perceptions. Over time, this erodes confidence and increases reliance on the toxic person's version of reality. This is not always conscious cruelty. It is a learned survival strategy that prioritizes psychological advantage over relational integrity. They may also use triangulation, introducing third parties to create competition, insecurity, or loyalty tests that reinforce their central position. Another key pattern is boundary resistance. When limits are set, they are tested repeatedly, often through guilt, intimidation, or playing the victim. Respect is not granted through consistency or care, but through perceived strength. Emotional reactions, anger, pleading, over-explaining, serve as reinforcement, signaling continued access and influence. In contrast, calm detachment disrupts these patterns. Without emotional leverage, manipulation loses its effectiveness and power dynamics begin to shift. Understanding these patterns clarifies why logic alone cannot resolve toxic relationships. The issue is not misunderstanding, but control. Toxic individuals are not randomly drawn to people. They are highly responsive to psychological signals. They gravitate toward those whose nervous systems have been conditioned to prioritize harmony over self-protection. Over-explaining, excessive empathy, guilt-driven compliance, and fear of conflict unconsciously signal accessibility. To a toxic mind, these traits suggest that boundaries can be crossed without mediate consequences. This attraction is not personal or emotional, it is functional. The individual appears capable of absorbing emotional labor, tolerating inconsistency, and offering validation without demanding reciprocity. Many people misinterpret this dynamic as bad luck or personal weakness, but it is neither. It is the result of learned relational patterns often rooted in early experiences where love was conditional or safety depended on emotional self-monitoring. Toxic individuals intuitively sense this familiarity. They test boundaries early, often in subtle ways, watching how much resistance appears. Each tolerated violation trains the relationship toward further imbalance. Protection does not come from explaining yourself better or proving your worth. It comes from nervous system regulation and behavioral consistency. Clear boundaries delivered calmly, without emotional over-justification, disrupt the expected dynamic. Emotional neutrality removes leverage. When reactions are minimal and standards are firm, toxic individuals lose interest, not because they have changed, but because control is no longer available. Safety in this context is not confrontation. It is non-participation in psychological games. Understanding the Dark Tetrad is not about becoming suspicious of everyone or pathologizing human flaws. It is about recognizing patterns that consistently erode dignity, safety, and psychological stability. Toxic behavior does not require dramatic cruelty to be damaging. Quiet manipulation, emotional absence, and moral flexibility can wound just as deeply. Once you see these patterns clearly, confusion disappears. What once felt personal reveals itself as predictable psychology. The most important realization is this: you are not required to earn basic respect, explain your boundaries, or tolerate harm in the name of empathy. Toxic individuals rely on access to your emotions, your doubt, your patience. When that access is removed, their influence collapses. Not through argument, not through exposure, but through clarity and self-respect. Strength in this context is not aggression. It is internal alignment. Calm boundaries, emotional restraint, and consistent self-protection send a message that no manipulation can override. You do not need to change them, diagnose them, or defeat them. You only need to refuse the role they assign you. Awareness is the turning point. Once you understand the mind you are dealing with, you stop engaging in psychological battles that were never meant to be fair. And in that moment, the power quietly returns to where it always belonged, with you.